During a tense Pentagon meeting, as General LeMay presented a strategic plan, the projector suddenly went blank. An awkward silence followed as a nervous technician rushed in, fumbling with the equipment. LeMay, with his usual stern expression, asked, "Son, can you get this thing working again?" The technician, sweating profusely, stammered, I think so, sir. Just give me a minute." LeMay, not one to waste time, replied in a deadpan tone, "Well, make it quick. If you can't get it going, we'll have to go back to using chalk and a blackboard. And trust me, my handwriting is as strategic as a bomb raid, effective but not pretty." The room burst into laughter, the tension eased by LeMay's humor. The smiling technician quickly got the projector working again, to everyone's relief. LeMay gave the young man a nod and said, "Good job, son. You just saved us from my artistic disaster." General LeMay walks into the restroom at a military base. As he meticulously washes his hands, he notices an army soldier exiting a stall and heading straight for the door without stopping at the sink. LeMay, with his usual stern demeanor, says, "Soldier, in the Air Force, we wash our hands after we handle important business." The army soldier, with a sly grin, replies, "Well, General, in the army they teach us efficiency, clean shots, clean hands." LeMay, taken aback for a moment, lets out a rare chuckle and says, "Touché, soldier." One day, during a particularly intense briefing, one of General Karl Spatz's officers nervously asked, "General, how do you always stay so calm under pressure?" Spatz smiled and replied, "Well, it's simple. I just follow the 3 rules of aviation." The officer, intrigued, asked, "What are those, sir?" Spatz leaned in and said, "Rule number 1. Keep the number of takeoffs equal to the number of landings. Rule number 2. The only time you have too much fuel is when you're on fire. And rule number 3. If everything seems to be going well, you've obviously overlooked something." The room burst into laughter, and then another officer chimed in, "Sir, does that mean if everything is going terribly, we're right on track?" Without missing a beat, Spatz grinned and replied, "No, Lieutenant, it means it's time to call for reinforcements." At an airbase, a young lieutenant was struggling to park a massive bomber in the hangar, moving it forward and backward repeatedly, but never quite getting it right. General LeMay, standing off to the side with his usual serious expression, watched the spectacle in silence. After several awkward attempts, the young lieutenant finally stepped out of the plane, nervously saluting the general. "Sir, I was just testing the landing gear's sense of direction. Turns out it's as stubborn as my mother-in-law." LeMay raised an eyebrow and deadpanned, "Lieutenant, if you're going to give me a show, the least you could do is charge admission. And Lieutenant, if your mother-in-law is as heavy as that bomber, I suggest you park her in a hangar too." One day, General Henry Hap Arnold inspected a remote airbase to ensure its wartime readiness. While meticulously examining every detail, he stumbled upon a group of lounging pilots, neglecting their duties. Renowned for his fiery temper, Arnold approached them, ready to reprimand. Just as he was about to reprimand them, the youngest pilot stood up, saluted, and said, "Sir, we were just discussing who had the worst aim. We almost invited you to join the competition, but we figured you'd win since you've been missing all the staff meetings." The entire base held its breath, anxiously awaiting General Arnold's response. After a tense moment, he burst into laughter and replied, "Ha ha ha! Oh, I bet if I joined, this whole base would turn into a real war zone, not because of the enemy, but because I'd be firing paperwork and form procedures at everyone." One morning at the Air Force Base, General Arnold walked to his desk and realized his coffee cup was missing. Arnold turned to his aide and asked, "Have you seen my coffee cup? I left it on my desk this morning." The aide, eager to help, checked every corner of the office. Finally, he returned to the general and said, "Sir, I think I found it." The aide held up a cup that looked identical to the general's, but it was filled with tea. General Arnold raised an eyebrow and said, "Tea? Well, this explains why the planes have been flying in circles today." Suddenly, another aide burst into the room, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Sir, I found your cup. It was in the cockpit of the prototype jet. The pilots thought it was some new fuel additive." General Arnold chuckled and said, "If coffee can fuel jets, maybe tea can turn them into submarines. Let's file this under military secrets." During World War II, General Spaatz was overseeing an important mission briefing when a young weather officer entered the room, looking clearly uneasy. "Sir, there's a severe storm on the way," the officer said. "It's not safe to fly today. Conditions are unpredictable." General Spaatz looked at the young officer thoughtfully. "Son, let me tell you something about weather and war." The room went silent, with everyone bracing for one of Spaatz's pearls of wisdom. "There are two things you need to remember. First, the enemy doesn't care about the weather." The officer nodded nervously. "And second," Spaatz continued with a mischievous grin, "last time I checked, neither do our bombers. They're waterproof." The room erupted in laughter, and Spaatz added, "Tell the boys to bring an umbrella just in case." On a beautiful day, General Arnold decided to test a new jet. Confidently settling into the cockpit alongside a test pilot, they took off smoothly. Minutes into the flight, they heard an unusual noise coming from the engine. Instead of panicking, General Arnold turned to the pilot and quipped, "It seems someone might have left some screws loose in there." The pilot, equally quick-witted, responded, "Well, we just have to make sure we don't fly too fast and shake the rest of them out." General Arnold chuckled and replied, "In that case, let's keep it slow and steady. We wouldn't want to turn this test flight into a hardware store grand opening." Ever since, whenever General Arnold went for an aircraft inspection, he would jokingly ask the engineers, "Did you check all the screws?" During a break between meetings, General LeMay headed straight for the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, took one sip, and his stern face twisted into a look of deep disapproval. He marched over to the young officer responsible for the lounge and barked, "What's wrong with this coffee, Lieutenant? It tastes like motor oil." A nervous young lieutenant replied, "Sir, it's brewed strong to keep us ready for action, just like your orders." LeMay stared him down for what felt like an eternity, then broke into a grin and said, "Lieutenant, if this coffee's ready for action, it's about to invade my stomach like a B-52. Get me a new pot." Without missing a beat, the lieutenant saluted and said, "Sir, I'll have it retreat and regroup immediately. No ground casualties on my watch." During the height of the Cold War, General LeMay, known for his stern demeanor and strategic mind, was inspecting a SAC base. As he walked through the facility, he noticed a young airman nervously fiddling with a complex control panel. LeMay approached the airman, his face as serious as ever, and asked, "Son, do you know how to operate this equipment?" The airman swallowed hard, looked at the imposing figure of LeMay, and replied, "Yes, sir, I do." "Good," LeMay said, staring intently at the panel. "Because frankly, I have no idea what any of these buttons do, and I was hoping you wouldn't need to ask me for help." The airman, catching on to the rare, humorous mood, grinned and replied with a cheeky tone, "Well, General, in that case, we're both in luck. I was just about to press the big red one to order pizza for the crew. Should I add extra pepperoni for you, sir?"